In this tutorial, I'll be covering the use of MIDI routing in FL Studio, which is needed for some plugins, effects, and hardware. Many sampler plugins, such as Native Instruments Kontakt, can load multiple instruments at a time. Here, my Kontakt instance has 4 sounds loaded. Playing on the channel with my MIDI controller only triggers the first one, however. If I look in the Kontakt interface, and keep in mind that this will vary depending on the plugin you're using, I can see that the instruments are set to different MIDI channels. Now, I could simply set them all to the same MIDI channel, 1, but then I wouldn't be able to have different notes for each. To solve this problem, I'll go to Channels, Add, MIDI Out. MIDI outs do not generate any sound. They simply route notes or MIDI that you play or write and send them to somewhere else. I'll call this MIDI out Kontakt 1. Over on its channel settings, I'll set the port to 5, and I'm just picking that arbitrarily, and then the channel to 1. What this means is any notes I sequence on this MIDI out, or that I play using my MIDI controller, will be sent to MIDI port 5, channel 1. Of course, now I need to set up something to receive MIDI on port 5, channel 1. Going back to Kontakt, clicking the gear in the upper left will reveal a place where I can specify the MIDI port. I'll set this to 5. Looking at the interface within Kontakt, I can see that the instruments within are already set to channels 1 through 4, so nothing needs to be changed here. When I play my Kontakt 1 MIDI out, I now hear output from Kontakt. The MIDI is going from my keyboard through the MIDI out and then routed into Kontakt, which is on port 5. With this setup, I can write and play notes to trigger specific instruments within Kontakt. I'll clone this MIDI out channel and set the new ones to MIDI channels 2 through 4. The port remains the same because they're all going to Kontakt, which is set to port 5. Now I can write and play notes to trigger specific instruments within Kontakt. After I've created a setup like this, it might be worth creating a layer tool and saving the whole thing as a preset, Kontakt and its 4 MIDI outs, so you don't have to do it again. Let's say you have a hardware synth you want to use in FL. MIDI outs can also be used to send MIDI to the outside world, or in other words, out of FL. Go to the Options menu and make sure Enable MIDI Output is checked. Then go to MIDI Settings and find your audio interface. In my case, that's Project MIDI, and pick a port, such as 23. By creating a MIDI out and putting it on that port, 23, FL will send MIDI through my audio interface. As it so happens, I have a MIDI cable running from my interface to a Roland V-Synth keyboard, which is receiving MIDI now. I'll open the mixer and create an input for it, and then play some notes to test the connection. Omnia sol temperat purus et omnia sol temperat purus et subtilis. You can control some plugin effects with MIDI out as well. Isotope Stutter Edit is one such plugin that is triggered entirely by MIDI. Since effects are added to the mixer and not the step sequencer, using a MIDI out is the only way to control them. Just like with Kontakt, I'll add a MIDI out on port, let's say 7, and then go to Stutter Edit and open up its settings. Once I have it set to port 7, it will receive MIDI from my MIDI out.